The video game industry loves nothing more than sequels, which makes it a little bit weird when some games never actually get follow-ups despite huge fan demand. However, all of the following could be a big case of be careful what you wish for, as the reality of what these projects would actually turn out to be is a far cry from the pitch-perfect versions that we all have in our heads. So with that in mind, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 fan-demanded video game sequels that should never happen. Number 10, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 3. When it comes to Star Wars video games, Knights of the Old Republic will always reign supreme. BioWare's original RPG was a seminal title, and Obsidian's follow-up, while clearly hampered by a limited production cycle, has come to be recognized also as an incredible game. Consequently, Knights of the Old Republic 3 has always seemed like a bit of a no-brainer, as close to a guaranteed success as you can get in the video game world. It's a tap-in, an open goal, a surefire bet. Yet, despite constant demands from fans and even the developers themselves, EA have been reluctant to revive the franchise outside of their MMO spin-off and the upcoming remake. And while yes, it would be amazing to see a proper third game get announced, a release under current EA management would simply be a recipe for disaster. See, when fans like me imagine Knights of the Old Republic 3, they see an expansive, detailed RPG, something classically BioWare or Obsidian. Unfortunately though, those kind of games just aren't what EA is focused on at the moment, and you can bet that if it did come back, it would have forced live service elements and multiplayer, essentially being Knights of the Old Republic 3 in name only. A sequel in general isn't a bad idea by any means, but in the current climate it's hard to imagine it ending up being anything other than a major disappointment. Number 9, Mirror's Edge 3. Mirror's Edge 3 should never happen, and here's why. Nobody is going to buy it. Yeah, yes, you watching this video right now might buy it, but you're gonna be like one of 10 people, and I'm gonna be one of the other ones as well. That only leaves 8 other people. And this is because while Mirror's Edge has a fan following, it just doesn't have an audience big enough to justify its budget. Fans spent years asking EA to make a sequel, and when they did, it bombed. And it's not a mistake the company is likely to make a third time around. This is also a case of, if EA even decided to bring the franchise back, there's probably no way that they just repeat the formula again and expect it to somehow catch on this time. As a result, it's more possible, like Knights of the Old Republic again, that Mirror's Edge would be changed so much to make it more marketable that it just wouldn't be worth it. Likewise, developers DICE are a completely different company these days. They're struggling with Battlefield, let alone doing fans of this series justice. Number 8, CONKER'S Bad Fur Day 2. CONKER'S Bad Fur Day was a foul-mouthed anarchistic platformer that released on Nintendo's otherwise family-friendly N64, an adult-orientated entry in a genre that was otherwise just so neutered. It stood out, not always for the right reasons, such as its censored console ports, and the nostalgia fans have for this deeply funny game has always spilled over into a desire for the sequel that never was. And while there is an argument that a self-referential crass game wouldn't be anything special in a world where Deadpool reigns supreme at the box office, the biggest major problem holding back a sequel is that the Rare of today simply isn't the Rare that devised CONKER'S Bad Fur Day back in the 90s. Sure, they're still talented, and Sea of Thieves showed that the spark of creativity that launched the company to success is still there, but they're hardly the underdog go-getters that they once were. Consequently, you could probably swap in any of the studio's franchises for CONKER, and the same issues would still apply. Number 7, Prince of Persia. Prince of Persia was Ubisoft's premier franchise in the 2000s. The original trilogy pioneered the kind of action platforming that other games dreamed of having, with a distinctive setting and art style that made it instantly iconic. You could also turn back time, which scientifically makes every single game better. Unfortunately, once the trilogy wrapped, the publisher struggled to find new ways to innovate, delivering an ambitious but flawed reboot in 2008, and then an interim sequel with The Forgotten Sands. Both were decent efforts, but in the wake of Assassin's Creed's popularity, a game which in itself was originally a Prince of Persia sequel that became its own thing, Prince of Persia felt a little archaic. It's for that reason why the franchise probably hasn't returned despite constantly being requested at every Ubisoft press event. However, modern Ubisoft just isn't interested in games like this. At least the remake is coming, and let's hope that will be good. Number 6, TIMESPLITTERS for. The original TIMESPLITTERS trilogy is home to some of the finest first-person shooters ever put to disc, and for a lot of people, were probably their gateway into the arena of competitive multiplayer. I mean, there's a reason the second game was featured in Shaun of the Dead. It was good enough to turn everyone who played it into zombies, always finding an excuse to have one more match. While the final game ended the trilogy on a slight downer though, it didn't stop fans from looking forward to TIMESPLITTERS 4, a game which was announced all the way back in 2007. Sadly, original developers Free Radical encountered problems that would plague them for years, resulting in the sequel being cancelled and the team being rolled into Crytek UK and then being laid off almost entirely. However, recently it has been confirmed that some kind of TIMESPLITTERS project is in the works, but a proper TIMESPLITTERS 4 releasing today would lack the driving force that made the OG trilogy such a personality-driven set of shooters in the first place. The original devs are no longer around to bring it back, and its charms were arguably feeling a little dated back in 2005. With its arcade focus not having the depth or complexity to challenge more competitive FPSs at the time. Number 5, Gun 2. It's a bit weird that Wild West games never got popular. The 2 times Rockstar dropped their earth-shattering Red Dead games, or I guess 3 if you're counting the ones they published, a surge in think pieces from journalists followed, wondering if a new boom was about to begin. But sadly, the audience's interest never really extended to other games. That is, with the exception of one little Western game released at the dawn of the Xbox 360 generation, Gun. Though it wasn't the most technically polished shooter at the time, and it wasn't exactly good looking either, there was something about this title. It had a certain charm to it that made it far more than the sum of its parts. It helped as well that there were few games at the time doing the Wild West gimmick, or simply out for the Xbox 360 at all, which made Gun a popular choice amongst players. Those 2 factors in particular are why a sequel would probably suck if it came out today. Gun was hardly a AAA title back then, and there's a good chance that a sequel would be a download-only budget game than a full-blown sequel. It had neither the characters nor the world to support a big franchise, especially in a post-Red Dead world, and is better off being remembered as an early hidden gem of the 360 era. Number 4, Black 2. Black was low-key one of the best first-person shooters of the PS2 generation. With production values that were absolutely mind-blowing at the time, the developers at Criterion were committed to making the most bombastic game ever made. The gunplay wasn't functionally all that different from similar releases at the time, but Black cranked everything up to 11 and made sure not to skimp on the finer details. Firing a machine gun here felt like firing a cannon at lightning speed, while grenades popped with the flair of a Michael Bay explosion, which, combined with the semi-destructible environments and great particle effects, made for ridiculously visceral firefights. So, by now you might be thinking, well, if it's so good, why didn't the developers ever make a sequel? And that's because, well, they kinda did. The original game didn't sell well enough for a straight follow-up, but the lead creatives did form into the studio to craft a spiritual successor called Body Count. As covered in a great Reykjavik video on the game, while their aims were pure, this new title proved just how much of Black's success was lightning in a bottle. Even if they did manage to rectify Body Count's mistakes, the little details that made Black so memorable are standard practice today, so a sequel would just be like another face in the crowd. It's kind of like trying to do another Crisis. You can't just keep setting the benchmark forever. Someone's gonna take over. Number 3, Bloodborne 2. Now, before you kill me for including this one in the list, let me just preface this entry by saying that Bloodborne is my favourite of From Software's games. Well, I'm still playing Elden Ring at the time of recording, so the jury's out on that one, but Bloodborne is one of my favourite games of the entire last generation, and that's kind of exactly why it doesn't need a sequel. While the world itself is rich and the combat is, of course, awesome, so much of Bloodborne relies on its sense of mystery and surprise to work. The original works so well because it starts off as seemingly nothing more than a simple Bram Stoker-esque monster tale, but it unfolds into this eldritch Lovecraftian nightmare about creatures from the beyond controlling reality itself. After you've played that card though, there's kind of nowhere you can go without undermining what came before. Bloodborne works as such a solid singular piece of art, and while of course I would definitely buy a sequel in an instant, not everything needs a follow-up, and FromSoft could be better off continuing to release spiritual successors instead. Number 2, Bully 2. Even though they created Grand Theft Auto, Red Dead Redemption, and Rockstar Games Presents Table Tennis, the one Rockstar game that never quite seems to leave the conversation is Bully, with its brand of playground hijinks causing a storm for both the right and wrong reasons back in the 2000s. At the time, it unsurprisingly came under fire for its name and the activities players were encouraged to partake in, with the most vocal detractors saying Rockstar were encouraging kids to be little terrors to their teachers and friends. Of course, it was far more tongue-in-cheek than that, and way too cartoonish to actually take seriously. Still, it was very much of its time, and being able to craft a sequel in the same vein would be a difficult balance to get right today, something Rockstar themselves clearly understand, as apparently 2 sequels have been cancelled over the last decade, according to some reports. Plus, while Rockstar can still deliver irreverent and goofy humour in their games, in general their releases have expanded beyond the realm of Bully's cartoon goofiness, and they need to take a major step back away from their realistic simulation-heavy worlds to deliver that arcade fun once again. I mean, I'd definitely welcome that, but is it really something the company would be interested in? Number 1, Half-Life 3. Half-Life 3, or Half-Life 2 Episode 3, or whatever the hell its title turns out to be, is the most anticipated sequel of all time. Its reputation is so extensive that it kinda seems dumb writing an introduction for it in this entry. You know how long overdue it is, you know the hype surrounding it, and you know the memes that it spawned. But it's that insane level of hype, which is why the game probably shouldn't ever come out. At this point, it's been built up so much that even if it was the best game ever, it would probably still be a disappointment to like half of the audience. The time for realistic expectations has well and truly passed, and if Half-Life 3 is anything other than a top tier 10 out of 10 game, it'll be ripped apart, not viewed as being worth the wait. Sure, it would still sell like hotcakes, but would the sales be worth the potential dissatisfaction that would stick with Valve potentially forever if it's nothing other than the masterpiece players have built up in their heads? I don't know, Jim, you tell me. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Would you actually embrace these sequels, or are you with me in thinking that it might be a case of be careful what you wish for? Let us know in the comments, and while you're down there as well, could you please give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.